What's the difference between car audio speakers and home audio speakers? That subject is deep. Believe it or not, there are quite a few differences. Let's talk about it. When it comes to physical characteristics, these two drivers look a lot alike. This one, of course, has a tweeter mounted here, but we're not talking about that. It's just the rest of the driver. Now, this driver from Audio Dynamic has a pipper cone, and so does this one. This driver has a squishy surround, and so does this one. The differences are subtle. This pipper cone is impregnated, so it's got other treatments added to it to prevent it from being easy to soak in water. If you get this wet, it will tend to be resilient and the water will tend to not soak in. Whereas this home audio driver, the pipper cone here, may have some treatment, but not nearly as much, not nearly to the same degree. And water can absolutely soak into this driver, getting it wet and degrading the cone material. Of course, dust caps are, they're made out of different things, so it's not really an issue in this particular discussion. The surround on a lot of home speakers is a foam surround, and it's used because it has a high tensile strength, very highly flexible, and it tends to hold its shape well. This one's very old and still holds its shape pretty good. The problem is, when exposed to a lot of sunlight or other atmospheric conditions that you would experience outside, this foam can break down. Over the course of a few years, or you can totally lose this foam surround and it just becomes separated. In fact, a lot of car manufacturers used to use this foam surround. Once they went from the folded paper edge surround to the cone or the roll surround, they went to that foam because in the homes it was proving to be very effective. But in the cars, it tended to break down, which is why over time they switched to different types of materials. In this driver, for instance, you have a rubber surround. This is an inexpensive driver, but the properties are still the same. The construction principles are still the same. This rubber has similar characteristics to that foam, but it doesn't break down in the sunlight. It doesn't break down from the weather and the exposure to the atmospheric conditions. So that is a big difference. Also, this particular driver has a petroleum-based cone. Again, naturally resistant to weather. Now, on this driver, we're using a fabric surround. So they have a fabric that's impregnated with a rubber of some sort that allows, the fabric allows it to have a very high tensile strength. Again, it won't stretch, but it will comply with the linear movement of the piston in the center. That fabric keeps it nice and pistonic without allowing it to stretch and deform. And you notice it's very soft. You can press it in. It's even wrinkled in places. That's not an issue with the driver. These two drivers are very similar in most ways. Let's look at the back. So we see some differences. One, they didn't care to decorate this driver because nobody sees it, right? So there's a little bit more decoration on the car audio driver because people buy with their eyeballs. And when you want to sell something, you need to make it look good. And most of the time when you're getting home audio equipment, you're buying something that's already assembled. There's no need to decorate it because it's never going to be seen. Now, having said that, you notice there's cooling right here, these vents on the side of that coil, where there is none here. You'll also notice there's a very small voice coil. It's probably, I don't know, ½ inch Whereas this one has a much larger voice coil. 1 inch or inch and a half. I don't know. It's pretty big. That larger voice coil does a couple of things. One, it allows more power to be applied. Two, the wider that voice coil is, the bigger of a space it's grabbing on that cone when it's moving it. So if we consider this bowl a cone on a speaker, and in fact, if you move it like this, it would absolutely play a sound. But that's not the point. The point is this. This is the cone of the driver, right? Now, do you think you'll have more control over holding this bowl if you hold it with a small point down here? It's going to be floppy. Or if you have a large area where you're grabbing it like that, it's a lot more stable. You can move it successfully. With a smaller space, it's going to tend to move around. Of course, larger voice coils also take away from the area of the diaphragm. So there's limitations on that. And then also they increase the size of the whole motor structure and all that. Those things can be problematic. The ohm load for most car audio drivers is usually 4 ohms. And most of the time in home audio drivers, it's 8 ohms, but not always. Something to be considering though, if you're going to implement one or the other, if you put a car audio driver in a home, it's typically going to be much louder than the driver you replaced if it's a 4 ohm speaker. And quite the opposite in a car. If you put a home audio driver in a car, it's going to be much less loud than the one it replaced because of the higher ohm load, not letting the same amount of power get through. You'll notice on this particular driver, there's a whole lot of different holes. That's because the mounting solutions in a car can be very different than in a home, where you typically have a piece of wood, so you can put the holes wherever you want. So beyond the differences between mechanically and physically what you see and the shapes and the materials, there are also other differences, mainly in the TS perimeters. One of the ones that you're going to run into the most is QTS. So, a driver designed for a infinite baffle situation is going to have a higher QTS. Something at least as high as 0.5 and higher. The higher the QTS, well, not necessarily the better, but because there's a point of no return where things get kind of bad. But a high QTS is important in car audio because everywhere you mount your driver is usually infinite baffle. You mount it in the door, there's no enclosure back there to give that an air spring to help control that driver. So you want a higher QTS so the driver can play free air without losing control of itself. Whereas in a home, you've got a known condition. You've got a definite enclosure. Usually the speakers are designed specifically to fit in a specific enclosure, and they know the perimeters it's going to go into, so they can design this driver with a QTS that, when added to the enclosure it was designed for, will give you a proper 0.707 QTC, which means the end result is you've got the honey spot. 0.707 is like the perfect spot for your ending Q factor. And whenever you're designing a driver to fit in a very specific enclosure, you can get an end result of a perfect QTC, or close to it, close enough. However, in a car audio, the guy designing this driver, well, he don't have any idea where it's going to go. It's probably going to be in an infinite baffle situation. So when they design the driver, they design it with a QTS that's already right around 0.707. That way, when it goes in its infinite baffle situation, it's going to have a similar movement characteristics to a driver like this that has a lower QTS, but an accumulated QTC. And when you're in a known enclosure, you're going to have the movement characteristics of that enclosure and this combined together in perfection. Well, this driver is designed to do that by itself. Just as long as you keep the back wave separated from the front wave, then you're jamming. Hopefully I explained that in a way that the average person can understand it, because I hate mathing people and dropping the rocket science. I want to put it in words and explain it in such a way that someone who just wants to do the basics can understand it enough to do the thing. I'm not trying to teach a class on audio engineering, because I absolutely could not do that. In fact, I would love to go to some audio engineering classes. However, I can communicate the basics, and that's what I'm trying to do. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. If you did, please hit the subscribe button, and by all means, comment. I love having discussions in the comments. I've learned lots of things in the comments. I've been corrected, and I apologized, and I took the best actions I could to solve those issues whenever I was corrected. I try to communicate, try to learn, and try to grow. Because if you ever stop learning and growing, it's over. Anyway, peace, guys.